Welcome to the Why Not podcast, where I talk with leaders in business and education about innovation and change. Gerritt Vander Linden is a dynamic leader whose passion for operational excellence is transforming the aerospace and defense industries. As the Senior Director of Operations at 47G, Gerritt excels at driving strategic initiatives, strengthening international partnerships, and ensuring every detail aligns perfectly to create impactful outcomes. While Gerritt didn't take the traditional path into aerospace and defense, he's made a significant impact through his exceptional ability to solve complex problems, streamline processes, and cultivate meaningful relationships around the globe. Whether he's spearheading international collaborations in deep tech or improving efficiencies with meticulous precision, Gerritt embodies leadership and innovation. Outside the office, he is currently completing his MBA at the University of Utah, where I had the privilege of meeting him, and his enthusiasm for learning and growth made him a powerhouse guest for today's episode. Where does discipline come from? This is a simple answer. Discipline comes from within. Discipline is an internal force. Sure, you can have discipline imposed on you by a person, but the reality is he won't give you real discipline because that external discipline is not strong. It will not survive. It cannot stand on its own. What you are looking for, what you need, is self-discipline. Self-discipline, as the very term implies, comes from the self, you. It comes when you make a decision to be disciplined, when you make a decision to be better. Of course, that was by Jocko Willink in his book, Discipline Equals Freedom. And I'm excited to have you on the show today, Gerritt. Thank you so much for being willing to join me on the Why Not podcast. I'm excited.
Happy to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome. I'm going to dive right in with our first question for today, which is, what role has self-discipline played in your life?
You know, it was actually funny when I saw that that was your topic for today's episode. Discipline is something that I have really cared about for a lot of my life. And self-discipline, I really like that quote too, because there is a difference between discipline and self-discipline. And I mean, that quote encapsulates it perfectly. And the fact that self-discipline does come from within and it's a personal choice. And so in my life, I wouldn't be where I am today without discipline and without self-discipline. And, I think you go through ebbs and flows with stuff like this, with discipline and with all other attributes that you're trying to improve yourself on. But it's something that I really care about, and something that every day, for me personally, I'm a very, very busy working a full-time job while doing the MBA in the evenings. And, I've come to over the last year and a half or so, I've kind of come to the realization that work-life balance doesn't exist. And I've come to prefer the term work-life harmony. And you can't find work-life harmony without discipline. I can tell my wife and my son and say, hey, I want to hang out with you guys tonight, but I have to get this stuff done first. If I don't have the self-discipline to then go get that stuff done, my harmony is off, because I'll spend more time doing my homework or doing my work rather than spending time with my family. And so I think it's essential in my everyday life, and it's something I'm always personally trying to improve.
I love that. Such a real example of how this can impact every area of your life. Being able to see like that, you got a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
You're wanting to spend time with your wife and your kid. You're in the MBA program. You're working full time, and that's a lot. You mentioned harmony, like instead of work-life balance, work-life harmony. What's the difference between work-life balance and work-life harmony?
I think in the traditional sense of as far as the definition goes, it's the same, right? Like when somebody says work-life balance, they what I personally think they actually mean is work-life harmony. And the reason I say that is because you're never going to get a balance. You just won't. I mean, if you're working at a traditional job, you're spending 9 to 5 at your job, and then you get 2 hours with your kids before they go to sleep at night. And so like, there's not balance there. right? But if you're able to build
Mm.
harmony and you're able to spend the right amount of time in work or the right amount of time doing your other hobbies, as well as spending the right amount of time with your family, I think words matter. And so having work life harmony and then making sure through self discipline that you actually are keeping that harmony, I think just makes sense. And at least in my head, it just makes a little bit more sense. Whenever I hear someone say work life balance, I'm like, what are you even like? It's not possible. I'm literally required to be at my job for 40 hours a week. How am I supposed to find, and then on top of that, other responsibilities with, in other areas of my life, with school, and I've got some church responsibilities that like I'm not going to be able to find balance. You're not going to be able to put my life on a scale and find balance, but you can find harmony where it works all around. And so, yeah, I think that's just a different framing in my mind, at least.
Yeah, that's very insightful. And you're right, words do matter. Hearing you explain the differentiation there, I, I almost think when I think of like work-life balance, I think it implies that everything needs to be evenly distributed, that your time needs to be evenly distributed amongst everything going on in your life. And to your point, you can't do
Yeah.
that quite literally. I mean, if you never want to sleep and you want to get in trouble at work and you want to like have your kids hate you, maybe you can try. But rather than doing that, I love your approach of just embracing that reality and finding that harmony where it might not be even, it might not be equally distributed, and your time might still, well, definitely needs to still be prioritized and managed. You're able to be there present for every element and every facet of your life.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like that.
And I think too, harmony, balance in my mind implies it's the same all the time, and harmonies
Mm,
change, right? And so in my life
mm,
right now, where I'm doing school and working at the same time, there is a lot less time I'm actually able to spend with my family. But as time changes, and as I as I graduate in the next year or so, and as I get different opportunities at work that maybe are less or more flexible, I'm able to spend more time with my family. Your harmony changes, but balance just implies that it's static and it's stuck. And I just don't, I think especially when you're younger and you're working, there's a level of quote unquote getting ahead, right? And I have to provide for my
mm.
family. And so I do have to work more, but the harmony that I can still find harmony, just maybe not balance in the traditional sense of the word balance.
I love that. Different stages of life have different types of harmony.
Yeah.
And you're in the thick of it right now, my friend. You're doing a great job. You're doing a fantastic job. As you're talking about harmony and how it changes, that connects to your worldview, which leads into the next thing that I really wanted to talk to you about as we set the stage talking about self-discipline. We're looking at work-life harmony. Tell me a story from Gerritt's life that will tell me how you view the world.
Yeah, I thought a lot about you. You sent me some of these questions beforehand, and I thought a lot about that question, and I just like had a really hard time coming up with a story because I feel like I don't have cool stories to tell. But I think for me and related to self-discipline, I thought a lot about my time as a uh, when I first started my career, I was actually so I started school in 2020 during COVID, and my last year of school, I got or before that, I had an internship, and it was with a company called EDC Utah, which is they do business recruitment for the state of Utah. And I think later we'll get into a little bit about my background, so I'll save the spiel. But while I was working there, I had a really good boss, and she was just incredible and let me have opportunities that I wouldn't have had elsewhere. I think that part of the reason I was able to get those opportunities was because of my self discipline and because I finished things when I was
Mm,
asked to do, and that led to more opportunities. To that point, I had this. We were on. This is a. I think how I view the world is very go and take it kind of a mentality. Don't let things come to you. An action, a bias towards action. Never should anybody have a victim mentality. It should always be think, even if you are the victim, there should always be a level in your head at least of what can I do now? What can I control now to change my circumstances? And so I just to that point, and when I was working at this job, I was an intern and I could have just taken the route of I'll do what I'm told and just move forward and I'll do the research you want me to do, and I'll buy the coffee you want me to buy, and like I'll do the basics, and then I'll go home at night.
Mhm.
But instead, I saw an opportunity. And at the time, I worked for the company EDC Utah had. We were using both Dropbox and Microsoft SharePoint, and then collaborating very regularly with the state of Utah, who uses Google. And so there's these three systems that we were using, and it was ridiculous. I was raised by my dad is a tech guy, and so I was always I wouldn't call myself a tech guy, but as far as I may be a little bit farther ahead than others, but I have no knowledge of programming or anything, but intuitively can kind of understand some of these things. And I was just looking at this, the fact that we're using Dropbox and SharePoint and Google, and was just like, why are we doing this? Like, we're losing documents all the time because people are using their personal Gmail accounts to do work with the state, and it just doesn't make any sense. And so I went to my boss, and asked her and said, hey, listen, this situation is going on, and like, we need to fix it. This is broken. Um and she approved, and I did all the research, and we actually transitioned to SharePoint, and moved everything to SharePoint, got rid of Dropbox. And I just think it's a very simple story, and doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't mean anything. But I think it just, for me, that's an example of me just taking the bull by the horns, having an action bias, and working to solve problems. And that's really what's at the heart of everything that we do, right? It doesn't matter your role, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter your state as a father, a mother, a spouse. It doesn't matter what it is you're doing. You're at the heart of everything. You're solving problems, and I think it's important for everyone, including myself, and to be able to look at and identify problems, but then don't just identify them. You got to solve them, right? You don't want to be the guy that's
Mm.
always identifying problems. Nobody likes to be in the room with that person. But to identify the problems and then go and solve them, I think, at least for me, is a way that I view the world. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And that's
Okay.
an excellent answer. That's an excellent answer. I love that story for a few reasons that I want to dive into.
Yeah.
As you were walking me through how you approached the internship, I've hired at different points. I've hired different undergraduate interns. I've been an undergraduate intern. I've worked with them, like seen multiple different angles. And a very common thing in that situation, and this is great advice for those who are currently in that situation, very common theme is they don't take action.
Yeah.
They're not proactive, and they're not curious.
Okay.
Very often it's like, I have seen the attitude where it's like, hey, we're here, we're an intern, we're awesome. Like, those other people are just doing homework right now, and we're going into an office building. And it's like, good for you. Look at all the other, like, look at the 150 other people in your organization. It's like, that's great you showed up. That is huge. That is a big part of the battle, but it's so much more than that. And that's when you start to get into character, and that's when you start to get into how you approach things. And as you were walking through your mentality with the internship, that's what I was hearing. It's like, okay, Gerritt's worldview is taking action, but you also have that character where you will make the most of what you have available. And that is huge. And you're absolutely right. We're going to dive into your journey and how you are now in the deep tech space and industry and working with 1G. But that's an excellent place to start the conversation, because without that character and ability to take action, I feel like we'd be missing a huge part of your message that you have to share. So thank you for sharing that story with
Yeah,
us.
absolutely.
Awesome. I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your boss was really great, and she helped you meet with people that and have opportunities that you might not have otherwise had. What about her as your leader made you feel comfortable working with her to think outside the box?
I think what it really came down to is she listened.
Mm.
I think I sometimes I look back on that story, and it seems like a simple story when I tell it, but I've thought about that in my life. And I've had other opportunities as well since then, but that was kind of the first opportunity I really had to do something real. And it wasn't just an intern menial job. That was a real project that I found, I worked on, and I built. But she listened, right? She could have easily just told me, listen, no, like, fine, everything's working fine. We don't need, you're 20 years old. We don't need this right now. So why you focus on what I've told you to focus on? But she listened. She had an open mind, And she was just really wonderful in that way, where
Mm.
because she listened and because she was open to the idea that those who worked for her had good ideas, it led to us growing in ways that we wouldn't have expected, more than just this simple project of navigating software stacks, but really led our organization in ways that opened and opened opportunities for all of us. I mean, and she just, and I would say she listened, and on a related note, she cared. You know, when we were, I was actually, so I graduated in 2023, and as I was graduating, I was working full time my last year of school, and I was interested in starting the MBA program, or interested in starting a master's program, I should say. And we were already living, this cinder block on the background. If you've ever lived in the family housing at the U, this is
Yeah.
the family housing at the U,
Yeah.
and so it was just like, well, let's just start another. I'm going to do a master's eventually. Let's start one in the fall when I graduate. And she was awesome because I told her this, and then she made 5 or 6 introductions where I was able to go have one-on-one conversations with different people about the different master's degrees they did, everything from law to an MBA. And she just opened, she cared, and she wanted to open doors for us, and that was wonderful. And I've been blessed with good bosses everywhere I've been so far, actually. And so it's not unique to her. I think it's I've had another boss that's done very similar things. It's very special, and I think when you find that in a leader, that's really, you can't take it for granted.
You want to know what I'm not hearing?
What's that?
I'm not hearing excuses and complaining. You're talking to me about going through your undergraduate degree, jumping into a master's. You're talking about your bosses being super great and learning a lot from their leadership, being able to be supported by them. And I'm hearing no excuses. And that's showing me that self-discipline, that mentality, that character for action. And it's an important reminder. And especially for me, I think, sometimes I struggle to have a little bit of a pessimistic attitude occasionally, which is one of the reasons I like doing this podcast, is then I can bring on the inspiration and have the conversation, be like, actually, you know what? Yeah, like, stop complaining, Noah, stop complaining. Like these, and you're a perfect example of why you can really benefit by not making those excuses, is then you are able to move forward and progress in your career and in your world. Something that you reminded me of, in the other day I heard this quote, and I don't remember who it's by, but essentially it's like, if you're in a low place, the only thing that's going to open for you are low doors. And if you're in a higher place, you're going to have higher doors. And the idea is you progress. And as you progress, you go to higher and higher doors. But at the end of the day, like, where you start is what you have to start with, what you have, and where you start is everything. And where you start can determine if you move up or if you just stay there for the rest of your life. And that's kind of an abstract idea, but it paints a good picture of what you're saying, which is essentially work with those around you with what you have, take action with that, and you'll start to see progress. And I just feel like that's such a powerful message.
Yeah, and I think I just echo that by just saying,
Yeah.
you're right. You can't control where you start, and different people start in different places. And I was very blessed, and I have no no, I've worked hard. I won't say I haven't worked hard, but I've been very blessed. But I think that there is some truth to that. I love that, what you just said about the low doors, where if you have the self discipline to work hard, and to not make excuses, because I'm not saying I don't. I'm sure I complain. My wife can attest to my complaints, but complaining does no good, right? Like, you got to do something about it. If there's something unjust about what's going on, even then complaining doesn't do any good. You have to do something about it. And so, bias towards action, no matter what place you're in, and having that discipline, that self discipline, to look at yourself and say,
Mm.
I want to be this kind of a person, or I want to do these kinds of things, and to then go forward and move those things. There's a level of integrity to it as well, personal integrity, of you say that you're going to go do something, and then you go do it, no matter what other people think. I can wake up in the morning and I can say, like, this is a kind of a silly example, less important from a work perspective, but I can wake up and I can say, I'm gonna go work out. I want to be somebody who works out and who's healthy, and eats healthy, and exercises. And my decision there does nothing in terms of the people around me, Rachel, my wife, won't care if I work out. My family, my friends, my coworkers, nothing's going to change in their lives. And so there's integrity where, if I say I'm going to do something for someone else, it's very easy to go and do that. But personal integrity is another level similar to this self-discipline level where you say, I'm gonna be a healthy person. And so that means I wake up in the morning and I work out. And that means I eat healthy. And it's hard to keep that promises to yourself sometimes. And you really have to develop that integrity. And I just think integrity and self-discipline are almost synonyms in some ways, because you can't have one without the other. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. I don't even remember how I got here, but
That's a great tangent.
just don't make excuses, I guess is what I'm getting at, because they don't do good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going to that quote from before, right? Discipline comes from within. It's that internal side. Like
Yeah.
you're talking about integrity and personal integrity. And I think you're absolutely right. And you hit the nail on the head. It's very much tied to discipline, and you can't really have one without the other. As you were sharing that, I mean, man, so many good things we can unpack from everything you just said. One of the things that I want to double click on, as millennials may say, is the integrity of being true to your own word to yourself. You mentioned being blessed, and everyone starts at a different spot, and you've had the pleasure of being blessed throughout your life. First of all, love your mentality on that. But as you mentioned that, one of the things that a lot of people who start in favorable positions struggle to remember is that you still have to be self-disciplined and try and work hard and do your best. They take a lot for granted. And I think your perspective brings that into real life, where integrity and discipline are at an intersection, because integrity means you're going to do what you tell yourself you're going to do, regardless of if anyone is watching, regardless if this has to be done in this particular way so that you can be blessed, right? Like, you're already blessed. Awesome. That doesn't mean you're going to stop. That doesn't mean you say, no need for self-discipline, no need for personal integrity. I'm good. Like, I'm blessed. I can be lazy and easy, take a chill pill. No, you don't do that. I want you to tell me a little bit more about why. Why have you developed this sense of personal integrity?
I think as you've been thinking, as you've been talking, I think what it really comes down to is being grateful every day for everything you have.
Mm.
I am like, I've been blessed with so many things. I have a wonderful wife, a wonderful son. Um, I've got another daughter on the way that we're just so excited for and so grateful for these things. I have a wonderful family, but I also am in a position now where I'm able to provide for my family, and we're buying a house in a couple of weeks, and so that's exciting, and very grateful for these different things that we have. And with that sense of gratitude comes humility, I think. And once you realize that
Mm.
you couldn't be where you are today without others' help, whether that's your spouse, whether you believe in a higher power that's helped, whether that's your parents, your family, even your coworkers, your boss, whatever that is, whoever's helped you get to that point, there's a level of I need to pay it forward to them. Like, I can't let their
Mm.
sacrifices for me be in vain. And so for my wife, for example, is sacrificing a lot for me right now. When with me working full time and also having school in the evenings, I like to say with this program, and I keep coming back to this program, but it's such a big part of my life right now. This program is harder for her than it is for me. I am very busy, but at least the stuff I'm learning is interesting, and the people I get to interact with are fantastic. For her, she just gets to sit at home lonely on a Monday night while I'm at class all night, and she gets to put our son down alone, and then 7 to 10, she's got nothing. And so I think when you to maintain that level of self-discipline and integrity, for me at least, it starts with humility and gratitude, because I realize that I couldn't be where I am today without the help of others, and I have to pay it forward. I can't let their sacrifices be in vain. And so I have to keep moving forward, and I have to do the things I tell myself that I'm going to do, because um because I owe it to them.
Powerful, powerful. That gratitude, it sounds like it's your fuel for not only the humility, but also the action. And like your worldview, like your story that you shared, like you make the most of every opportunity you have access to, and you do everything that you can. And I love that. That's beautiful, that gratitude. And congratulations on the house and on baby number 2 on the way. That's fantastic. Power to you and to your wife. It's hard to do the professional MBA program. It's challenging, especially with young kids, young family, and working a full-time job. And so power to you. I think, it reminds me of Patrick Bet David. He's in the insurance game, and he has a podcast, and he's a big guy, and he has this quote that I I almost got it tattooed. But, basically, it's like you the more grateful you are, the harder you work.
Mm.
And like gratitude and work are directly connected. Like if you're not grateful, you're not going to work that hard. And I've experienced that for sure, especially as I've gone from different position to different positions. And so I like where I'm currently at. Like when I first started here, I was like, holy cow, this is awesome. What an opportunity. And that gratitude directly transcends into how hard I work.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not the only one who experiences that. And like you're saying, like that action and that gratitude and that humility, they're all interconnected, which further adds to the need for personal integrity. I think one could say that it's easy to become entitled. It's easy to be like, I don't like, I deserve this, and not have that humility tied towards those blessings. But I love your mentality. I love your attitude. Tell me a little bit more about your route to where you're at right now with 47G. We've talked a little bit about your worldview, your past, and your mentality. Now that we have that framework of how Gerritt sees the world, tell me and help me understand the approach you've taken and why you have chosen to invest your skills and time in the aerospace and defense and deep tech industry.
Yeah, no, 47G is we're the industry association for aerospace and defense companies across the state. And the way I got here, really, I didn't get here on purpose at all. What happened was I did my undergrad in economics and political science. And the reason I did economics and political science was because I wanted to get essentially a degree in international relations. The University of Utah didn't have an international relations degree, but BYU's was essentially economics and political science together. And so I really was interested in international opportunities. I started working as an intern at EDC Utah, and they are the business recruitment arm for the state of Utah. And started as an intern and moved into a business development manager, which essentially just means I worked with companies that were looking at relocating or expanding into Utah. So a little bit less international. And the reason for that is because I just realized there's so much stuff to do here, right? I don't need to change the world elsewhere. There's a lot of problems here to solve too. Still interested in some of the international stuff and was doing recruitment for some international companies, which was really fascinating. But when I became the recruitment manager there, I had two options. I could go and work in the life sciences industry, or I could work in the aerospace and defense industry and help aerospace and defense companies to relocate to Utah. And I chose aerospace and defense. I mean, life sciences and aerospace and defense are both awesome and both doing really cool things. But aerospace and defense for me just meant a little bit more. I grew up here in Utah, and Hill Air Force Base was obviously a big part of Utah. I love my country deeply. I love the United States. I love the experiment that is the United States. We have our problems, but I think that's worth defending. And so the little part I could contribute to defending that by helping companies to expand and helping companies navigate that process was really valuable. And so I was excited to serve in that way. And then also, I think it's from another perspective, aerospace and defense is a very stable industry, and its jobs are very stable. And so I loved my role at the EDC Utah because I felt like I was, our mission was to bring jobs to Utah and to help Utahns find quality jobs. And so aerospace and defense jobs you don't really get much more quality than that. They pay well. There's a real purpose behind what they are and what each of them are doing. And they're very stable. Recession or not, you always need aerospace and defense. And in fact, in a recession, government spending tends to go up and to help try to stimulate the economy. So that was how I first got into it. Then from EDC Utah to 47G, G was founded 2.5 years ago. I was actually at the first meeting just by working with EDC Utah. I knew the CEO, and my time at EDC Utah was over. It was time for me to make a jump. And so I reached out to him and asked if, not planning on staying in the nonprofit space, but reached out to him and asked if there was any other if he knew of anything, and he told me to come work for him, and so I did. And here we are now, and so we work with over 180 companies in the space in Utah. Aerospace and defense actually makes up 20% of the economy here. So it's a huge
Oh,
deal
wow.
in
Yeah.
Utah. It's a huge deal. And so we get to work with companies all across the state and help them navigate the different issues that they're facing here. And it's I get to see the coolest things. I get to learn the coolest things. Get to be in the rooms with some of the brightest minds, and just get to learn a lot. So I love this space. I think it's a really important space, and it's we get to do cool things every day.
That's really cool. When you and I first met through the MBA program and you were telling me about what you do, it blew my mind a little bit. It's one of those industries that's like you don't know a whole lot about it unless you're in it.
Yeah.
And like I didn't realize it was that big of a chunk of the Utah economy. That's really cool. Awesome. So you don't take the traditional route into the industry. You start working with 47G. Tell me a little bit more about what 47G does and its mission. Obviously, we understand now the space that it's in, but tell me a little bit as an organization, what do they do? What is their mission?
So our mission is to make Utah the nation's premier ecosystem for aerospace and defense. And we do that through convening, promoting, and advocating for the industry. So we have a lobbying portion, and it's probably the smallest portion of what we do, but we do have lobbyists on both the state Capitol Hill and the DC Capitol Hill to advocate for things that are happening in the industry. But promoting and convening are the two biggest things that we do. Um, we will promote, like you just said, a lot of Utahns, well, they know aerospace and defense is a big part of what's going on here, especially if you live up in Davis or Weber County. They don't actually understand how big it actually is, and it's 20% of the economy. And so we want to promote the industry to the general public, help solve for workforce issues. Workforce is an issue
Mm.
for in all industries, really, but aerospace and defense, especially here in Utah, is really feeling it. And the reason for that is Northrop Grumman, a big reason I should say for that is because Northrop Grumman has what's called a cost plus contract, which what essentially means they can, from a practical standpoint, what it means is they can essentially pay whatever they want to engineers and recruit them. And so Northrop Grumman is expanding a ton up at Hill Air Force Base. They're working on what's called the Sentinel program, which is going to replace the ICBM. And so it's a huge deal and matters a ton for national security. And we love that it's here in Utah. But the smaller fish kind of get eaten up as their employees are being offered huge raises to go work for Northrop Grumman. And so we want to promote the industry to the workforce to help them to understand and help young people understand that they can go into this space and they can work in this space, especially as we make this transition in Utah. And I think just generally that college isn't for everyone. And so there's opportunities that pay really well that don't require a college degree. And so we promote the industry in that way, really trying to target workforce and younger, K through 12, but also college students, but mostly K through 12 in that sense. And then we convene. And so we'll bring the industry together on a regular basis. We probably have about 2 meetings a month that we do in different formats. And that's an opportunity for our companies to network. When you think about building the premier ecosystem, there's a lot to that. But one big part of that is do business in Utah. Don't go to
Mm.
Arizona, don't go to California, don't go to New Mexico to find for your suppliers. Get them, first of all, bring the supply chain gaps to Utah. But then, second of all, if they're already here in Utah, let's help them meet each other and to source material from each other. And so we've been fairly successful in doing that. I think we really just want to bring the industry together here in Utah to collaborate on a regular basis to make Utah the nation's premier ecosystem for aerospace and defense.
Impressive. That's extraordinary. Tell me a little bit more why Utah is a significant place for 47G to do that. Like, I'm assuming that takes investment, that takes time. That's your full-time
Yeah.
job is working and helping them grow and improve their operational efficiency. So tell me why Utah for them?
No, I think that's a really good question. There's a lot of different ways I could take this. First of all, it's Utah, and the people here are incredible. And you
It's
have
true.
really good workers here that are also very patriotic. And that does matter in the aerospace and defense field and industry. There's some other practical reasons as well. Hill Air Force Base has been here for a long time. It's actually the largest single site employer in Utah, Hill Air Force Base is. So
Wow.
most Utahns probably have an uncle or a cousin or an aunt or
Mhm.
a parent who has worked at Hill Air Force Base in some capacity, whether civilian or not. so that's another big thing. It's just really present here. But then Utah also, from a practical standpoint, has a lot of opportunity as well. 40, so the Defense Department has identified 50 critical materials that are necessary for aerospace and defense, and for just defense and national security purposes. And 40 of those 50 critical minerals are actually found in Utah. So I won't get too into the weeds, but China recently, if you've seen, is politics wise, tariffs in China. There's a lot going on there. Before all this
There's a
tariff
lot.
stuff, China actually is our source for a lot of essential critical materials for national security. And so the US is trying to develop that capability here so we don't have to source from China, because why would
Mm,
you source from your adversary when you're thinking about national security? Like that's kind of
yeah.
silly. And so Utah has 40 of those 50 critical minerals. And so a huge opportunity in that sense to basically pull things from the ground in Utah, the rawest of materials, and turn them into a final product. So that, from a practical standpoint, Utah is a really great place for that. But also, there's a long history here in Utah. So Northrop Grumman, first of all, Northrop Grumman's all over the state, but up in Promontory, which is in Box Elder County, it used to be ATK, which folks older than us might recognize. I only know it because I've been working in this industry, but ATK was a big, they make the rocket boosters for the NASA operations, and so space here has been a big part of what's going on here. But then also just the long history of, we actually, when NASA was looking for another spaceport location, Utah was one of the 4 finalists for to build the spaceport here instead of in Florida or California. And the reason we lost it was because we didn't have an ocean, and so um, you got to drop the rocket booster somewhere in order to reuse, and so for economic purposes, and so we lost it for that, but we were one of the 4 finalists. And so there's just a really long history here in Utah of working in this space. And so I think that's why I would say here. And then finally, it's a very 20% of the economy. It's very stable. It's a very, very stable industry and provides really good jobs to people that are, I wouldn't say recession proof, but are recession resistant, that and provides really good economic prosperity for people that are working in those space.
Powerful, powerful stuff. And what a mission to be on, you know?
So
Like I agree with you. There's a sense of patriotism that is important, especially in terms of, sourcing defense and aerospace protection and everything involved in the industry. And you're absolutely right. I have many, many family members in the military or civilians with that engage in the defense industry and participate in that. And it is critical and it is foundational on protecting and sustaining what we have here in the United States with all its flaws. Absolutely. I love that. I think, a lot of people talk about tying personal meaning and mission towards their career. I think patriotism can and should absolutely be one of those elements that you can tie directly to your career.
absolutely.
And the fact that that is an opportunity, such a big opportunity here in the state of Utah within the aerospace and defense industry is exciting. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing and helping us learn more about that. Part of what you said about 47G is fostering and growing and helping the industry, essentially building a community for them. And that looks different in different ways, such as like making sure jobs come to Utah, as you were saying. That community aspect is often missed in business. And I may be biased because I mentioned I do have family like in the military and the defense industry, but I feel like there's more of a sense of community there than most industries, especially in corporate America. Like I work in banking right now,
Yeah.
and like I work at a community bank, and so community is important to us. But as an industry, I would say community is still lacking. And one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast was to share your insight and your perspective on an industry community. Like to me, that's just such a fabulous idea and one that's not often seen or implemented. So maybe help me understand why it's important for industries to have that community. Like what is it that this industry is benefiting? Let me rephrase that. How does this industry benefit from having that community and those community efforts from 47G?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is the innovation that is able to happen because of that community. You hear about in Utah, especially the innovations that happen at Silicon Slopes. Film is a big thing here in
Mm,
Utah. WeWork has been a thing for a while across the nation. And what's called, I've heard it called bumpability before, where you bump into folks that you weren't expecting to bump into, and you're able to innovate because of that. That's a big thing, and that matters a lot.
mm,
And so by building a community in the way that we're building it, where folks are able to come together on a regular basis, it allows for innovation like that to happen. To say, tell me about your company and what are you doing? And it's like, and then you hear them talk about their company, and then you say, you know what? Tell me about this problem that you have that you just mentioned. I think maybe I can solve that. And then we can come
mm,
together and we can work together on this problem together to solve a bigger issue. And I think that's really why it's important, is innovation that's able to happen because of coming together in that way. I think the second thing I would say, as far as from an industry perspective, why it's important to build that community is you're able to be bigger. The sum of the parts is greater than the whole, right? And or sorry, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's how the saying goes. And so when you think about from an individual company perspective, and this is really important from an advocacy point of view, but what is one tiny company of 50 employees going to be able to do to change the industry? There's really not much. And that matters from advocacy. And if there's a bill that's being passed that harms your industry, you have to come together in some way to be able to fix that. Or in Utah, especially, workforce is really hard. And the small 50-person company who's having a hard time hiring 5 engineers or 5 machinists, they can't do much to change and to make, like, to improve a pipeline, right? They can't go
mm,
to the state and say, listen, we need our high schoolers to be in intern programs with us and with other companies like us to expose them to aerospace and defense, and that it's a possibility for them. You can't do that as a single person company. But when you come together with other companies in this community of especially the like-minded industry, everyone is going to have the same issues. There's not a single company in our entire membership base that doesn't have at least some level of issues with workforce. And so to be able to come together and all of us to be able to hit that problem together allows for greater movement in that space. And then from G in this
mm.
situation, G can be the single point of contact for the state, for other industries to collaborate and think about opportunities that exist.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, that the bumpability, I like that.
Yeah.
That's an awesome phrase. I'm going to use that. Because yeah, I mean, the you create value when you share ideas, and you create value when you can problem solve and brainstorm and hack different situations together as a community, as a group. Some of the best campaigns I've ever done or been a part of, a lot of times those ideas were started by somebody that doesn't work with me in my day job. It was from someone either completely detached or doing the same thing, but for somebody totally different. And I was like, oh, wow, just like being able to bounce ideas back and forth helped me do way better. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I do this podcast. Like, this is not my day job. I just love talking about ideas and sharing thoughts with bright and courageous and bold minds such as yourself. And I like the fact that you are organizing that into it by industry, and organizing that by industry. I feel like provides and fuels power into that bumpability like you're talking about. Love it. That's fantastic. As you do that, then as you're bumping shoulders and talking to different people within the aerospace industry, what are some trends that you're expecting throughout this year? Like, I know, like, I don't usually have questions around forecasting and predicting, right? But like, it's fascinating to me. I'm curious to learn more. Like, so I'd love to know what you think. Oh yeah, for this industry, 20% of the Utah economy here. I think this might happen in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. I Let me just preface anything I'm about to say by saying I'm not an expert. But I think there is so much up in the air, right? In
Mm,
the current administration is really, nobody knows what's going to happen. You don't know, tariffs are here one day and they're gone the next, right? I think some big opportunities that exist for the industry is going to live in the international space.
mm,
So and the reason for that is Trump, for better or worse, is causing countries around the world to really beef up their defense spending. And we can argue
Mm.
and quibble about whether or not the way he's doing it is the right way to do it. But the result is countries are beefing up their defense spend. We went to Romania a month ago now and did
Okay.
a trip there and brought some of our companies with us. And it was incredible to see how willing and quick the Romanian government was moving to try and build their defense spend. I actually met with, so in my role, I do have a lot of opportunities to meet with international folks. And so 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I met with the ambassador from Finland. Finland, so in this space, especially in the European Union, there's a percent spend of your GDP that is kind of the expectation for you to spend on defense. And so in the European Union, a new principle is that the countries will spend 2% of their annual GDP on defense. So Finland has already
Okay.
actually, so lots of countries in the European Union are building to get to that point. Many are not there yet. But they're building to get to that point, and the European Union especially has relied on, and maybe I should be saying NATO instead of the European Union, has relied on the United States for their defense protection and just counting on the U.S. for a lot of these things. The
Hmm.
Finland is at 2% already, which is awesome, and their plan is to grow to 3% by 2029. 2%, 3% doesn't sound like that much, but when you think about it in terms of a percentage of GDP, that's nominally a lot of money. So, and the truth of the matter is, there's really not overall better defense tech than there is in the United States. And so, regardless of what happens with tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and trade wars, whatever it is, the European Union, especially those Eastern European countries who are bordering Russia and who are looking at what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine war and are worried about what Russia is going to do next, they're already starting to beef up their spend, and a lot of that is going to be coming from U.S. companies. So that's a big opportunity that exists. The aerospace and defense industry is probably better equipped to deal with tariffs, especially tariffs with China, because there's been a push to get your supply chain out of these countries already and to source them, at least nearshore them. And so tariffs, they won't impact their supply chain as much. And then I would also say defense spending, it's hard to see what will happen. Don't know what Doge is going to do. They might cut defense spending, but to this point, it doesn't seem like they will. It seems like defense spending will at least stay the same. And so the aerospace and defense industry is in a particularly advantageous position in some ways, especially with what's going on with market volatility and uncertainty about the future. So I think that's probably what I would sum up with.
Mm.
International opportunities are going to be huge,
Yeah.
especially in Eastern European countries, but also everywhere else. Taiwan and Japan and some of these other Asian countries are worried about defending themselves from China. And so lots of opportunities exist in the international space, and they're particularly positioned that tariffs, I'm not going to say they won't impact aerospace and defense companies, but will probably impact them less because they've already spent the last little bit trying to bring their supply chain back to the United States.
Very helpful. Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And, I think it's helpful as we are in uncertain times just across the board to hear some perspectives on things. And so I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I appreciate all that you are doing and for the community that you're building and for the efforts 47G is doing to bring stability and job placement here in the state of Utah. You're doing fantastic work. And I didn't send you this question beforehand, so if you don't want to answer it, feel free to not.
Yeah.
As you're talking, and really throughout this entire conversation, there's been a theme of patriotism. And given the fact that we set the stage for such a wonderful conversation around personal integrity and action, and I'd like to know what patriotism is to you. Like, what does it mean to you when you say that? Like, ooh, like, tell me. Yeah, explain that to me.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I think so the United States is the greatest experiment to ever be run. And it has been a booming success. It has been a booming success to, as we have, as you think about the Declaration of Independence and you think about what had to happen for the United States to even be a country, right? The Revolutionary War should never have been won by the US. And so our country has become, because of its booming success and because of how blessed we are to even be to live in this country, but also for this country to even be a thing. I think I'd go back to gratitude, and that's really where patriotism
Mm.
starts: is gratitude to be born into a country where you can, like, you have freedom of speech, you have all these freedoms that we enjoy. And it's fascinating to see how other countries have modeled after the United States, right? Our
Mhm.
system, while not exactly, has gone across the world. And to be born here, there's a level of gratitude that comes with that. And because of that, all of us have some level of responsibility to pay that forward. And it doesn't have to be, when I say pay it forward, I don't mean to I don't mean to serve in the military. Obviously, I haven't served in the military before. But what that means is caring about the institutions that exist here, being grateful for those institutions, and doing things to support those institutions. We got to vote. We got to vote. We got to make our voices heard. We have to, there's a civic duty that all Americans have, to contribute to society in a way. You know, a
Mhm.
classic JFK quote, don't ask what my country can do for me, ask what I can do for my country. And I think all of us in some level should have some level of mindset in that way, because we are all so blessed to be living in this country. And it has problems, and I will never deny it doesn't have problems. Um, they're fixing the things that need to be fixed. There are things that are fragile that have to be protected. But we as Americans, we have to do our part to go and participate civically. So I think that's when I say patriotism, that's really what I mean, is to be grateful for the country that you live in and for the people that have sacrificed. Again, this is kind of funny how this has come full circle in a way. The people who have sacrificed for you and for the country, um, to put the country where it is today, that you have to pay it forward in some way, and you can't let those sacrifices be in vain. That's what patriotism is.
I love that. I love that. It really brings things full circle. You're talking about harmony. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for speaking optimism and harmony towards patriotism. Thank you for contributing that. You know, you're absolutely right. We all have a contribution that needs to be shared, and that requires us speaking up. It requires us to be grateful. And I'm a second gen, right? So my dad is an immigrant to the United States. He came from Mexico. And I had a conversation just a few weeks ago that struck me as being ironic, because I've always had this sense of gratitude for being here, the sense of gratitude for the freedoms and the opportunities that it allows me. And this individual that I was sharing this conversation with did not share that perspective and that mentality. And it got me thinking, like, okay, like what makes the United States unique? And really it comes from that sacrifice. Like you're talking about, it is an experiment. Experiments have parts that do better than others, and parts that fail, and parts that do incredible, and parts that are replicated, and then parts that people try to replicate and don't do so successfully. And it creates a new opportunity. And it is that opportunity that provides for me that sense of gratitude, and that sense of humility and appreciation for what others have done before and what others have been able to do, that provides me this opportunity to create a podcast, to have that freedom of speech, to have that ability to meet with you and to discuss the industry in Utah, to discuss things like discipline. Like none of this infrastructure would exist without the contributions, sacrifices, and efforts made by others. And that is worthy of being grateful and having gratitude regardless of political ideology. And I appreciate that harmony and that patriotism that you've spoken today.
And I think I would just add to that, that I think part of what makes the United States so special is partially because of people like who you were just referencing, where we all have such different opinions and we are a melting pot. There is nowhere else in the world that you can go to where you find people of so many different ethnicities and nationalities. Um, and there is, when we think about our family, our genealogy, our ancestors who have put it forward and paid it forward for us to be here. Your dad being one of those who sacrificed, I'm sure, a lot to come here. And the reason he did it was to build and to find greater opportunity for his family and for you. And I think there is real power in recognizing the sacrifices that people before us made, both from our country perspective, from a family perspective,
Mhm.
from a even like a coworker perspective. I think there's real power in recognizing those sacrifices that have been made because now you know you have a responsibility to pay it forward to your dad who sacrificed to bring you here to the United States and just to get you opportunity. And I have to pay it forward to my ancestors who brought me and my family to the United States. And like there is real power in recognizing those sacrifices and being grateful for those in order to then pay it forward because we
Mhm.
owe it to them.
Absolutely. It goes back to that personal integrity and taking that action. And wow. Well, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. We live in dividing times, and there's a lot to be said for finding that appropriate level of harmony. Whether we're talking work and life, industry, community, politics, patriotism, there's an absolute need for that unity and that bringing together. And I appreciate all that you do to do that and for continuing to contribute in that way on today's episode. I appreciate that.
Hey,
I
Noah,
want to be,
can I just add one
yeah,
more thing on that note?
absolutely, dude. I'm trying to be respectful of your time,
No, I
man.
know.
Please, if you want to share more, I'd love it.
I feel very strongly about this stuff. And you asked me about
Good.
this community stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's truth there. It is important for us to be building communities from an industry perspective. But I
Hmm.
think our personal communities are just as important. I did one of the degrees I did in my undergrad was political science and Bowling Alone. Have you heard of this book, Bowling Alone?
I'm not.
So it's a book by Robert Putnam, but the purpose behind the book is it was written in 2000. So it's going to sound very prescient when I explain the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is that Robert Putnam identified that more people were bowling, but less people were bowling in leagues. And he
Huh.
related that trend and it relates to everything, right? Less people attending church on Sunday, not from a religious perspective, but from a community perspective. So less people building community in that sense. And he related that to an increased level of polarization in our world.
Hmm.
And we in our modern digital time where it is so easy to scroll on whatever social media app it is that you're scrolling on, or just sit in your dark office and play video games all day, it is so important to intentionally go out of your way to build community because that is how we get past this polarization. Our world, our
Hmm.
country insists on finding and identifying the other side. But when it comes down to it, that when you build that community and you find the common difference or the common ground, you realize your differences are not actually as far apart as you think they are. And there's beauty to be found in
Hmm.
that. And so when I think about building community on an industry level, it's important, obviously, for all of these practical reasons of innovation and advocating together and promoting together. But on an individual level, I would argue it's even more important for us to be intentional about building our community, going in person to things, going and putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable. Like you doing this right now is like I said this before we started recording, but it is like I'm so impressed by the vulnerability that it takes for you to go and put yourself out there in this way to intentionally build community with people that you're talking to and reach out to them. We don't know each other very well. And I'm sure it took a lot of guts for you to shoot me a message and say, hey, come on my podcast. And there's an intentionality about that matters so much for us to get past this level of polarization because it's so toxic right now in our world sometimes when really there's so much common ground to be found. And so I think just on that note of community, don't bowl alone. Go and join a club or go and go into the office every once in a while. Go if you work from home, go work at a kiln or a WeWork so you can build community with people that way. Join a pickleball club, whatever it is. I don't think people bowl anymore, but go and do those things with other people in order to build that community on a personal level to counteract some of the polarization that we feel in our world today.
And might I add, build that community and that unity around good, positive, common ground, like you're saying, not on
Yeah,
negativity and on hatred and on
absolutely.
polarization. Everything you said, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it's interesting because right now there's a lot of people so desperate for that community that they're joining and coming together to have a community over things that aren't that good.
Yeah.
It's not like a pickleball thing. They're like, and there's a lot of online, online hate and online trolling where people are like, oh, this is a community. It's better than nothing. So I'm going to join it. And it's like, no, like build communities that empower.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to mean you agree on everything. That doesn't mean you have to be the same, but you can have that level of community and empowerment that will boost you and strengthen you. Because really, I mean, life's a team sport, man.
Yeah.
Business is a team sport, but life even more so. Like, you cannot and should not do it alone. We're a social species for a reason. And like you mentioned, like for you, a big part of your community is church. Like, I'm not religious. You are religious. A big part of like our community can be talking about ideas. Like, we
Yeah.
both go to the University of Utah. That can be a community. Like, there's so many ways that you can look at your surroundings and the space that you live in and build a community from that. And it does not need to be built on division and hate and conflict, especially when we are so blessed and so privileged to live in a community in a country that provides us with the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, exactly.
Powerful message, man. Beautiful. I
And I
appreciate you
think
sharing that.
there's so much that can be learned from being with people different from you. Um,
Yeah.
going to this church example you just brought up, there's so much I can learn from hearing about your experiences, or even if it's, go political, because that's where this always goes. There's so much that conservatives can learn from liberals, and empathy that can be gained as we get to know people that we don't know, and that are different from us. And it takes intentionality. It is so easy to get caught up in echo chambers online, and this
Mm-hmm.
community that you keep talking about. If you're building it online, that's not a community, right? Like, if you don't know the person's name, that's not a community. If you've never met them in person, if you don't know how many kids they have, that's not a community. We need to be intentional about building community with everyone, with people around us, with our neighbors, not just those that are like us.
Absolutely. And hiding behind a Reddit name that hides your identity does not do that.
No,
I love
no, it
it.
doesn't.
Wow. Well, Gerritt, I have been uplifted and benefited from having this conversation with you. I appreciate you and all that you are doing. I'm going to ask my concluding question, as sad as it is. I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours and hours, but I know you got a busy life, and so I'll conclude with the question. But what does happiness mean to you?
A really good question. Again, you're really good at this whole question thing. I thought
Thanks.
about this question a lot. I think what happiness means to me is seeking to do as much as I can for others. You don't find happiness by doing things for yourself. And, this can be taken to an extreme, and people might disagree with my statement by saying you need to take time for yourself, to self-care, yada, yada, yada. But I think we in our society, going back to this community building thing, there is true happiness to be found in seeking and caring for others, whatever that looks like. And losing yourself in service to others, that's where happiness is found. And so I think that's what happiness is to me, is finding as many opportunities to serve others. And that service can be my wife, right? It doesn't have to be strangers on the street, but we need to always, to find happiness, be serving others as much as we can. And to be loving others as much as we can.
What a beautiful message. Well, I appreciate all that you do for others. And yeah, man, beautiful message. Thank you. Thank you again. I appreciate you. And may you continue to see success as you strive and continue to succeed at having that personal integrity, that self-discipline in that community. Thanks, man. Appreciate
No,
you,
thank
Gerritt.
you, Noah. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Why Not podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and share with your friends.